Prey is a movie of two sides. On the one side, you have a fairly interesting sci-fi action movie that is set around a Comanche tribe in 1719, about how a girl in the tribe who is a skilled hunter wants to take on a male role in the tribe and be a hunter-warrior instead of having the normal Comanche female role that consists of setting up camp, cooking food, looking after children, and all those other menial tasks that women have been lumbered with for thousands of years. A space monster appears, and said girl finds herself fighting for survival against a far superior foe, and on the way proves that she is a fierce warrior, deserving of a place with the hunters and of greater honour within the tribe. This simplistic form of movie is pretty good on the whole, and will probably keep you entertained for an hour and a half. Just don't think about it too hard. Now, let's have a look at the other side of this coin, and check out the latest installment in the Predator franchise, and do a little bit of that pesky thinking that Hollywood wishes we didn't. But before I get started, please consider subscribing, as that would really help me out, and if you like this content, give it a like. Okay, on with the vid. I am a massive fan of the original Predator movie. It is one of my all-time favourite films. I'm a little bit less of a fan of the second movie, and of course the less said about anything that came after, the better. Predator is the gold standard of sci-fi movie monsters. Within the genre, only Alien is more well known. And while I am a huge fan of the alien character, it is not an intelligent spacefaring species who deliberately aim to be at a specific place at a specific time. Aliens are randomly located characters that just do their thing wherever they happen to end up. The Predator, on the other hand, is intelligent, thoughtful, creative, and deliberate. The only reason you find a predator somewhere is because it wants to be there. It planned to be there. It took the time out of its busy polishing schedule to choose a route, gather together its sharpest, pointiest tools, and let its buddies know that it's off on holiday, and probably how long it expects to be gone. And since predators turn up at the same place time and time again, as they often hunt specific prey, he will no doubt have chatted about his intentions of bringing back a fancy-looking human skull. They even check the weather, for God's sake. In other words, predators don't turn up by accident, they know why they are there, and they know what it is they are likely going to hunt. This new movie seems to have thrown much of that lore in the bin, and decided to portray the predator as more animalistic, making the predator itself look more monstrous, with a ridiculously big mouth, and making its mask out of a bit of what looks like bone, which doesn't even cover its whole face, rather than the technically advanced and more appropriate original style mask, which wasn't just for show, as it had some sort of breathing apparatus built in, which while we know wasn't essential, it was clearly considered important enough that predators don't generally take it off unless necessary. There are some other changes too. The plasma cannon has gone in favour of some kind of laser-guided arrow launcher, which makes absolutely zero sense. Why, I hear you ask? Why would a laser-guided arrow gun be such a bad idea? Well, dear viewer, the reason why this gun is a terrible inclusion is because predators are not cowards. They like to get up close and personal. They like the challenge. They like to be given a run for their money. A weapon that does all the work for them would be a complete dishonour. I can hear the derogatory comments down at the Preddy pub already. Did you hear that Big Mouth used that homing arrow gun to bag himself a bunch of humans? Yeah, I did. What kind of pussy-faced, ugly, maternal, incest-loving weakling would use a pathetic plot device like that? What's wrong with the good old wrist blade? That's what I always say. Of course, there's a reason they introduced it, which I shall get to later. Also, would it have killed someone in this movie to say, "Ooh, it's a bit hot this year"? Because predators only turn up when the weather is extra hot, which at no point is mentioned in this film. Okay, back to the Comanche girl, whose name is Naru. She wakes up and starts her day as a female in the Comanche tribe by going out in the woods hunting for roots. While there, she distracts herself by practicing throwing her tomahawk, and she is clearly very skilled. Glancing down, she sees some footprints. Next thing you know, she's managed to sneak up on a CGI deer that happens to be grazing in the woods. Then, the strange sound of an alien ship entering the atmosphere disturbs the deer, and Naru and her doggy have no time to ponder the odd, unusual sound. Instead, they're forced to give chase and get pretty close to catching the deer, but it escapes. And here is my first real issue. The girl is pretty agile, but in no world can a human keep up with a full-grown deer running through a wood, especially a girl having to jump over fallen logs and even slide underneath them. It is just not possible. Now, maybe CGI deer are slower than real ones, and the dog was very helpful and intelligent in driving the deer towards Naru, but it just felt too forced in its attempt to show us that Naru is a very capable hunter. The next thing that bugged me is that the dog suddenly manages to get its tail caught in a foot trap, which is like a man trap, just a bit smaller. If it had caught its foot, that would have been one thing, but how the hell did it manage to whack its tail into the trap? Obviously, this is just a bit of foreshadowing and not to be taken seriously, but honestly, it's the little things that bug you the most. She then examines the trap and chain as though she'd never seen iron before, but then is distracted by the sound and fireball made by an alien ship in the sky, and so completely forgets about the strange metal trap that hurt her dog, and which any normal person would have brought back to the village and wowed everyone with its magical hardness and odd construction. She then hangs out with her brother, who she remarks to that she saw the Thunderbird in the sky, and that she thinks it's a sign that she should take the warrior's test of hunting something that hunts you back, which is the clumsiest bit of foreshadowing in movie history. The question is, how did the rest of the tribe not notice the sound of thunder and the huge fireball in the sky? An event that I am sure would have brought out the most mystical, superstitious madness the tribe could muster, and they would probably have taken it as a signal to go and exterminate some nearby tribe. After all, the Comanche were bloodthirsty buggers, and slaves and captives don't appear by themselves. While she is attempting to be given a warrior's rite of passage, she discovers that there is something strange going on. So she tells her brother, who is well known in the tribe as a very good warrior. Unfortunately, later that day she had an encounter with a mountain lion that required her brother to save her and bring her back home before he then went back out and killed the mountain lion. Her brother is then pronounced as War Chief, which I found both confusing and also enlightening, because there are no adult men at camp, only women and young braves, so from this we can assume that these Comanche are at war with another tribe, and the adult men are off fighting, killing, catching slaves and captives, and generally doing their job. On the other hand, Naru's brother becomes War Chief, and does that mean that they have had word that their current war chief had died, and so a new one was needed? This has to be the case because the Comanche only appointed a war chief when they were at war. When they weren't at war, a war chief would just be another Comanche. There is no war chief without a war. Anyway, let's continue. Naru tries to warn her brother that there is something strange in the woods, after she finds a skinned snake and some strange giant bear-like tracks. But he isn't paying attention and decides that after her failure with the mountain lion, she should just get on with being a woman rather than getting ideas above her station. Incidentally, the mountain lion scene is also a bit perplexing because they hunt the mountain lion because it attacks one of the Indians. They find and save the missing Comanche, then they decide that they need to kill the mountain lion, so they find its den. Outside the den, it already has another fresh, mostly eaten kill. Naru and another annoying Comanche wait in a tree to ambush the cat, but it grabs and kills the annoying Indian and then comes back to kill Naru. I can't help but think that this is very bizarre behaviour for an animal that isn't hungry and has no real reason to go after the humans in its neighbourhood, which means that it can only have been protecting its cubs, which will now no doubt die after Naru's brother kills their mum. Perhaps he killed them too. The whole thing seems like a very unnecessary and sad story of humans being generally selfish and thoughtless, which I would have expected a little less of from people that should be more in tune with their environments. So in the movie world's time-honoured tradition of completely ignoring people who give you good advice, Naru decides to ignore her well-meaning, supportive brother, who after a little time might have come back around to the idea of her trying to be a warrior again, and instead heads off into the forest with her faithful dog Sari to search for what can only be described as trouble. You literally see her going miles and miles away from her village because she is so full of her own selfish need for validation and wanting to prove herself right that she is completely willing to put others at risk from an unknown danger if it helps her achieve her goals. We then see a wolf manage to sneak up on a rabbit in short grass that wouldn't even cover the tops of your toes, yet was able to hide a wolf long enough for it to get within 20 feet of a rabbit, an animal known for being very aware and nervous of possible danger. The wolf then chases the rabbit, and then just as the wolf is about to catch the rabbit, it accidentally runs into the predator, which had been observing the event, and because I'm a pedant and prone to being annoyed by small details, I noticed that the air seemed to be blowing the grass generally in the predator's direction, which means that it is strange that the wolf wasn't aware that something was there, cloaked or not. I'd have thought that the strong smell of polish would have been a dead giveaway though. Then, for reasons that make no sense, the wolf attacks the predator. Now, it may be that this wolf was just batshit crazy and so figured a giant invisible thing would be no problem for it. Or it could be because the wolf is so skillful that since sneaking up on a rabbit in the middle of a golf green was no issue, invisible monsters stinking of blood and polish hold no fear for it. But the real reason is the movie maker desperately wanted to show off his new predator and show us the predator was actually hunting stuff. So threw in an unnecessary scene so that he could wow us and make use of his costumed actor. As if we need to be told that a predator might be doing a little bit of hunting, but a wolf would not have been on its list. Certainly not a lone wolf. It would have made more sense if it had hunted the mountain lion, but that plot device had already been taken. The next plot device, scene of the movie, sees Naru making a returning tomahawk by simply tying a bit of rope around the handle and then giving a little tug, at which point the tomahawk returned magically to her hand. Now, there are weapons in martial arts that use this technique, but no one would be dumb enough to try and catch the sharp pointy bit with their hand while it is moving at a velocity fast enough to come directly back to your hand. That is just asking to say bye-bye to your fingers. And then, as if the returning tomahawk wasn't silly enough, though cool, credit where it's due, she then uses it to catch rabbits when she has a perfectly good bow and arrows, which would have been far more likely to accurately kill a rabbit than just leave it with horrific injuries as it runs off into the woods to bleed to death. The next thing you know, Naru has managed to walk into a mud trap, which is like quicksand, but with mud. Curiously, she doesn't attempt to go back the way she came, which would have been about a foot from firm ground. Nope, instead she heads the opposite direction, and so gets farther and farther from the edge. But fear not, because it just so happens that she has a tomahawk on a rope. So, she uses it to pull herself back to firmer ground. But what is this? She's covered in mud! But worry not, she finds a nice clean stream to get all that yucky stuff off. Haha, the movie got us there. Just as we thought we were going to get a repeat of the beat from the original Predator movie, they subverted our expectations. I found it both gratifying and a little annoying after the build-up to it, but I'm glad the director wasn't trying to completely remake the original movie, which would have been dull, predictable, and a boringly modern mistake. Next, Naru comes across a field full of skinned buffalo, which was clearly not the work of the Predator. So, who could it have been? I wonder who modern Hollywood would want to depict as the kind of monsters that would just kill and skin 30 buffalo and leave all that meat and useful, valuable bone just lying there to rot. Big think. Oh, and then Naru finds a cigar. Wink wink. Okay, now we come to yet another of the things I found remarkably annoying, because it was beyond stupid. And since girls are on average more intelligent than men, even Naru, who so far has shown herself to be a gifted hunter, but not exceptionally bright, should have known better than to mess with a grizzly bear and its fresh kill. While Naru is observing the bear from the top of a bluff above a stream, the wind changes and the bear notices her. Lucky for her, Sari, her very intelligent dog, who I am convinced is easily the best actor and most intelligent creature in the movie, acts as a decoy to buy Naru time to get away. Naru takes this golden opportunity to escape the vicinity of the bear's kill to get her bow ready. Now, it is hard to kill a bear with a gun, so you can probably imagine what use a bow would be for anything more than making it just a bit more pissed off. And a bow with a string as slack as hers is probably going to be more a danger to herself than anything she might try and aim the arrow at. Anyway, back comes the bear chasing after the dog, and instead of running away after her dog, she waits long enough to fire a momentumless arrow at the bear before finally deciding that maybe, just maybe, she should attempt some self-preservation and tries to run away. She manages to hide inside a beaver lodge, but the bear starts to tear it apart to get at her. Then all of a sudden, the bear has a hang on a minute moment and detects the Predator, who just happens to be standing nearby checking his messages and shitposting on the Predator version of Twitter that in my imagination is called Screamer. The bear then attacks the predator and actually makes a good show of it, but as often happens with bears, it doesn't press home its advantage and the predator gets the drop on it. Naru then dives into the stream and uses it to get away from the predator, but doing so she makes a splash and the predator notices her. Later, Naru is walking through the woods, going who knows where. It apparently isn't in the direction of home, because a few of the braves who have been sent by her brother to bring her back sneak up behind her. But she tells them to piss off, which causes her to have a vaguely realistic fight with one of the braves, in which she kicks his ass. He then sucker punches her and ties her hands so that they can take her home. Unbeknownst to them, the predator was in a tree and saw the whole thing. White Knight mode enabled, it then kills all the braves and Naru runs away with the predator giving chase until she gets caught in another foot trap. The predator then decides that she isn't a threat and disappears when it hears the sounds of approaching Frenchmen. Naru then finds herself in a wooden cage being taunted by a cigar-smoking savage. Oh look, a cigar! And Naru found a cigar next to the skinned buffalo. Strange. Now, as an Englishman, I understand why the French, might be portrayed as savage filth that crawled up from a sewer, but it is historic fact that the French treated the American Indians very, very well, and went so far as to mix cultures, and intermarry, and learn to live the way the Indians did. And so attempting to portray them the way this movie does is simply bigoted and ahistorical, and says far more about the filmmaker than it ever could about the French colonization of the Americas. Anyway, back to Naru. We find that they have captured her dog, and her brother too, and they also realise that there is something out there hunting them. They even realise that the predator is looking for the most interesting, challenging prey. Who knew they could be so astute? The French then decide to use Naru and her brother, tied to a tree, as bait to lure the predator into a trap so that they can kill it. Now, just why they would want to do this, instead of leaving, is anyone's guess. But in this world, invisible monsters that are hunting you has become a reason to stick around and say, hi. The predator then kills about 30 frogs, in a variety of ways, in a scene that felt extremely out of place in a predator film, since the odds of a predator choosing, which this one does, to unnecessarily reveal itself to numerous people at once and take away the personal nature of its activities is just boring, stupid, and just not very predator-like. Naru and her brother escape, and Naru goes back to the French camp to collect her tomahawk on a rope, and incidentally saves her dog while she's there from about 5 frogs, who she defeats easily using the power of unrealistic strength, and the power of plot armor, not to mention the tomahawk on a rope that miraculously still hasn't chopped her fingers off. While Naru is at the camp, a wounded Frenchman, asks her for help, and in return for her helping him, he gives her a pistol, and after showing her how to load it and fire it just once, we are meant to believe that her primitive mind completely understands the weapon. Mind you, she magically learns how to use predator tech too, so she is obviously very special. Much of the foreshadowing in this movie is almost physically painful. It is just so obvious. Speaking of foreshadowing, we learned earlier that somehow Comanches have a medicine that lowers the body temperature. I missed this earlier because the scene was unimportant, but in this scene, she gives this medicine to the wounded Frenchman, and when the predator turns up, she discovers that it can't see the Frenchman. Of course, the predator then steps on the poor frog, and he screams so the predator splats the poor guy, but the foreshadowing is now complete, as Naru has a light bulb moment. Of course, if your body temperature actually lowers much below the 27 degrees Celsius it needs, you will suffer hypothermia, and when that happens, you'll become slower and stupider until you pass out and die. Not ideal conditions for fighting a predator, which makes this medicine basically useless. But the movie doesn't let common sense get in the way of their fancy plot device. Suddenly, Naru's brother comes out of nowhere and decides to attack the predator, which at all times is moronic, but in this case, it was an absolute necessity, because the movie maker needed to add a bit more foreshadowing by allowing Naru to see that the predator's arrow gun fires homing arrows that go to wherever its visor's red dot sight is aimed. Even if that means the arrows have to detour around Spaghetti Junction, they still manage to find their mark. Important knowledge. Naru's brother, who is an awesome warrior, actually looks like he would have defeated the predator, had this predator not been a dishonorable coward. Yes, you heard that correctly. This predator chickens out of a heads-up mano-a-mano fight and uses his cloaking device to hide so that he can sneak up behind Naru's brother and stab him in the back. Call me crazy, but this seems very un-Predator-like. They are honourable warriors as shown in Predator 2, albeit with a sense of humour as we see in Predator 1987, where when the Predator had lost, he decided to nuke the area while laughing his head off. Anyway, after the cowardly Predator kills her brother, Naru sensibly legs it and comes up with a plan to kill the Predator. A plan that in no world should have worked because it is just nonsense and requires a very unlikely sequence of events. There is also a scene where Naru tortures the cigar-smoking frog, something the Comanche are famous for, though she uses a bit of Predator tech to get the job done, which must have been novel for her, if a little tame by Comanche standards. She then eats the body temperature lowering medicine and uses the Predator to do her dirty work of killing the Frenchman. She then shoots the Predator in the back of the head, dislodging his visor, which was her plan all along, as she then half-inches the visor and runs off to set up her convolutedly unlikely plan. What, I hear you ask? What could that plan possibly be? Well, dear viewer, let me explain it to you. First, measure the height of the Predator and find a large mud trap, then measure the depth. Then, tie spiky bits of wood onto trees all around, so that if the Predator jumps from tree to tree, it will get a nasty, spiky surprise. Next, carefully set up the stolen visor so that it is pointing over the right part of the mud trap. Then, create a false trail that leads to the mud trap, being sure to of course choose a direction that means there will be an old broken branch of a tree about 3 stories up, so that should the Predator not willingly walk into the mud trap, then you can jump down onto his back and attack it with your tomahawk on a rope. Should the Predator throw you off like the lightweight little girl you are, then make sure you have a dog ready to jump on its back and cause it to throw its spear in the wrong direction into the ground, where you can grab it later. Now, quickly run around in a circle to allow the Predator time to jump from tree to tree and land on the spiky bits of wood you carefully tied there earlier. Don't forget to showboat and do a backflip off of the last tree. If all goes to plan, the Predator will deploy its wrist blades and they will get stuck in the tree after your showboating backflip causes the Predator to lose concentration as it admires your form. Once the Predator is stuck to the tree, grab the handy spear that the Predator dropped earlier and use it to cause the Predator to deploy its wrist shield, which he will use to accidentally chop off his own arm. So far so good. Now, you can't expect everything to go your way, so if the Predator happens to deactivate his spear and it all goes short and much less spiky, and then he starts hitting you with the edge of his shield, which miraculously doesn't chop your head in half, then dodge as best you can until the Predator grabs you by the throat. And if for some reason he doesn't simply squeeze your neck until your head pops off like a faulty jack-in-the-box, then make sure to rip out one of his tusks and use it to stab him in the face. The next bit is a little bit tricky, so pay attention. You are going to need your dog to bring you your tomahawk on a rope, but he's going to need to pass it to you while you run and slide between the Predator's legs. If all goes well, you will be able to hit the Predator in the knee with your tomahawk, then jump on its shoulders, and then wrap the tomahawk rope around its neck. Now, this will take a little while, but don't worry because the Predator will not at any point attempt to use its remaining arm to grab you or throw you off, so no pressure, there's no need to rush this part. Now, jump off of the Predator onto the opposite bank of the mud trap and pull the Predator off balance so it lands in the mud trap and sinks out of sight. Don't go breathing a sigh of relief just yet because Predators are tool buggers and he will stand up after a minute and give you a bit of a nasty shock as his ugly giant head rises from the mud. But if you remember to measure the height of the Predator and the depth of the mud trap before, then you'll have nothing to worry about. The Predator will then use his homing arrow gun to try and shoot you because, well, that's just what they do, okay? Now don't forget to look smug, as when the arrow is fired, the targeting sight on the helmet activates and causes the arrow to fly in a circle through the trees and then hit the Predator in the head, just where you had aimed it earlier. Oh yeah, you're a genius. And that plan was not the most convoluted, unlikely, unworkable plan in the world that required the Predator to not understand how his own technology works. Now all you need to do is cut off the Predator's head, take it back to your camp, and you'll be proclaimed War Chief. Yay! Success is yours, and all it cost you was your brother, most of the young braves of your tribe's lives, oh, and a whole load of friendly French fur traders, but ixnay on the ate, as far as that goes. Oh dear God, when I go through this movie step by step, it makes it seem far worse than it actually is. It is an okay movie. Just don't let yourself think about any single event, nor any combined event, because that will allow realism and intelligence to start seeping through the cracks of the wall between you and your brain that this movie requires you to build before watching. I think that my final thought on this movie is that it is a shame that Taabe, Naru's brother, wasn't the star of the movie, because he is actually a great character, and not just because he was able to go toe-to-toe with the Predator, and would probably have won if the Predator hadn't chickened out and cheated. No, he was also a great role model, an example for others to follow. He was dedicated, thoughtful, modest, encouraging, strong, had great leadership skills, was not willing to put people at risk unnecessarily, was brave and fearless in the protection of his braves and family, and he wasn't careless and he wasn't selfish. Naru, on the other hand, was both selfish and careless. She is entirely responsible for all of the Comanche killed by the Predator, which may never have come into contact with her tribe if she hadn't gone so far afield in search of it, forcing her brother and the other young men of the tribe to follow her into the danger zone. I went to the not that danger zone. So where does this movie stand in annals of Predator movies? Well, I'd rate it somewhere around 4th, but since I haven't watched them all for a while, I'm not sure that it might not make it to the 3rd spot, as it really is not that bad as far as dumb movies go. There is probably a sequel coming, since the gun that the Frenchman gives to Naru is the one that the Predator gives to Danny Glover at the end of Predator 2, which is a bit of a shame, as the original story of that gun having come from a pirate that came into contact with the Predators sounds like a much more interesting origin story. I just hope that the next movie will have a more believable, well thought out story that isn't jammed full with as many errors as there are minutes in the day. This has been Movies Suck, wishing that either Hollywood would just leave this franchise alone, or actually hire people talented enough to make something worth watching. Signing out. Leave a like, share and subscribe, and I will catch you guys on the flip side.